And welcome back. Today we got for an interview for you guys today a special little treat. We have Timothy Runkle with the Green Party. He's running for the state treasurer's office at in Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
That is right.
So, could you go ahead and introduce yourself a little for those who might not know who you are, more specifically how your current role as Howie Hawkins, and more broadly, unofficially, the Green Party's ballot access coordinator is served?
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Timothy Runkle. I'm from Pennsylvania, and I work predominantly within that state, within the state party, and I also functioned this year within the Howie Hawkins campaign as their ballot access coordinator for Pennsylvania. So my role in that function started in about February. That's the time frame at which Pennsylvania can begin to petition to get a ballot seat, and it ended a little bit after what was supposed to end in August. But we were involved in a number of challenges to our nominating papers and lawsuits that actually finished up about a week ago. So I dealt with the volunteer organizing effort to get signatures to place Howie Hawkins on the ballot, as well as we asked the state for relief of that signature process due to COVID-19 and the difficulties of circulating face-to-face under a global pandemic. And then right up until the end, just defending that petition against the challenge, which ultimately didn't work out for Howie. He's been removed from the ballot here in Pennsylvania. And he'll be pursuing a writing campaign, he and Angela Walker, the vice presidential campaign.
Awesome. Can you sum up a little more in detail? Because I know you touched on it a little bit about how Howie Hawkins was effectively removed from the ballot in Pennsylvania. Could you kind of sum up the current dilemma facing the Green Party in regards to voting access or ballot access?
Yeah, the way you get access to the ballot as a candidate for a minor party or a political body in Pennsylvania is you circulate these nominating papers. There's a certain minimum amount of signatures that you need to collect. For president, that's 5,000 signatures. Those need to be from registered voters from anywhere in the state. This year, we collected over 8,300 valid signatures, and those were collected between the time frame of the end of February and the beginning of August. We turned our petition in on August 3rd, which was accepted by the Department of State as a valid submission, and Howie was, in their eyes, placed on the ballot. However, was challenged by representatives of the PA Democratic Party who seceded in removing him based on some paperwork deficiencies that were, as written in the law, should have been appended to our nominating paper. However, like I said, the Department of State was fine with the submission as intended. And unfortunately, we were removed from the ballot.
So kind of to sum this up, you're basically saying that despite being accepted by the DOJ and been accepted largely by the federal government, the local and state party of the Democratic Party had challenged this to kind of remove him from the ballot.
Yeah, challenges are common. Anyone has the right to put forward a challenge to a candidate's nominating papers for any reason, being that their paper may be deficient on, maybe you didn't actually have registered voters sign your petition, because you just can't have anyone sign them. They need to be registered in Pennsylvania. There could be things. There's other submissions that are required, like a financial disclosure statement. Believe it or not, if you don't submit that, then you can't get on, along with paperwork to properly identify you as a candidate nominated by your party. And some of that is even down to the nitty-gritty of your party rules, because sometimes it's your party that determines what you need to submit to the state. For instance, if you're part of the Democratic Party, there are statements that you need to provide that are specific just to them, that basically lock up your delegates the folks that are running to be a delegate to the electoral college that would vote for you if you were president. So those are, there's some unique party items for some parties, but generally the Green Party follows what is minimally required from the Department of State.
Okay. So so I guess furthermore, do you think that this challenge by the Democratic Party is something that can be accepted as at face value as, oh, well, they're just trying to make sure that you have your papers in order, or do you think there's a greater meta narrative at this, or at least speculatively?
Well, I don't think it was done in good faith, and you kind of have to back up the story a little bit to understand why. Part of what happened this year, I mentioned earlier, we asked for relief from the Commonwealth for those in-person signature requirements because it was just impossible. We had a government, or the governor's order restricted social gathering for well over a month and a half. You couldn't get out of your house basically without violating the order. So how do you get somebody's signature face to face, because it needs to be done in pen and ink so we sued the Commonwealth, and in that suit the Pennsylvania Democrats intervened to say that we were not due relief because we were not going to be harmed by this, and nothing was stopping us from circulating in a global pandemic. So you had the state party intervene in that case, which we lost. So that brought us to like July, which we only had a month left to circulate at that point. So we really got the boots on the ground to get people out. Now, then come August, when we turn in the papers, the challenge comes from the two cohorts of the Democratic Party, one who ran for city council seat in Scranton, and the other one is a chair of the Lawrence County Democrats. And they were represented by the same lawyer that just fought us in the previous case. And under their challenge, they didn't just challenge the top of the ticket for the administrative deficiency that he was ultimately kicked off of. They challenged all the down ballot candidates. So in this big challenge to Howie and Angela, they also included our Auditor General, our Attorney General, and myself, the State State Treasurer petitions. And the argument against the lower three was that basically, since Howie was going to be thrown out, that we should all be thrown out. So to us, it seemed like it was a direct attack on the party. They attacked all our candidates, and they had just intervened in a previous case to prevent us from getting any sort of relief under a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So, I don't think it was done in good faith. During the challenge, it came up that you can challenge line by line signatures, say that this is not a registered voter. Mm-hmm. Well, we rejected all those claims, got disputed and put off the table when it came down to it. They said that something like 7,000 signatures were forged, and they never brought evidence to the table, and they had to drop all of that by the end of the challenge. So I think that what they really wanted to do was just throw everything they could at us, whether it was right or wrong in that challenge, and hope that we didn't defend ourselves.
Now, I guess a follow-up question would be: was this something that you would have seen from even the GOP, for example, or do you think this is specifically the Democrats trying to target the Green Party?
Well, their challenges are common. Like I've said that before. It's an easy way to knock somebody off if they really have deficient and bad signatures. Mm-hmm. It's an easy way to do it. So people look at this, and it isn't unique to the Democratic Party. But do we ever see this from the GOP? No, and I think it's because they don't consider us a threat to them on like a statewide race. So they can let us sit. We do run against them in races where it's just a Green versus a GOP member, and we don't see challenges there. Part of that, I think, is as we begin to grow stronger as a party and we challenge it and we enter those local races, I'm sure we will see challenges from them in the future.
Okay. So with these challenges, I know you kind of mentioned how they've been thrown out, but how, is this something that you guys go to the courts with, or do you just simply Is it something that you just dispute with the department, with the DOJ, or how do you guys combat this? Sort of basically.
Yeah, so this was the first time I've been through the process. I've heard of ones previously.
Hmm.
There's one in Pennsylvania that's notorious. It's from around 2006 when we ran for a Senate campaign against Rick Santorum and Bob Casey. And in that case, they we spent 9 weeks in the appellate court system defending these signatures. And basically, what it looks like is you have a representative from the challenging party, representative from us, the defendant. You have a judge, and those entities basically just work it out. So it's lawyers creating whatever thing they can think would stick to the wall. It's actually folks sitting down, volunteers, and looking at these signatures and going, we all can agree that this one is a registered voter because all the good information is here and it's in the state system. It takes a lot of time to do that. We were actually thinking that we would end up spending 9 weeks, but how we defended this time around, before we even got to that point where we were in court,
Yep.
we had pretty much an army of volunteers going through our petitions and validating them against the state's information. So when it came time to sit down with the lawyers, they started, well, let's look at 300 at a time. And what we did was turn over, here's all the 7,000 that we validated. And we swamped them with that information. The opposing counsel couldn't actually respond quick enough to challenge that own information that they had previously challenged. So they couldn't give it a response. It took them about 5 days to look at 300 signatures and that they had all previously looked at and say, yeah, these are correct voters or not.
Okay. I mean, so then brings me to the next question. Like, I know you had mentioned that Howie has been taken off the ballot, but this has been happening, across the board in many states. Um, and I know from what I'm gathering, the down ballot candidates have not been taken off. So I'm assuming that this is something that you challenging these challenges, so to speak, has been relatively effective.
Yeah, there was two ways that we were affected with going to the courts this year. Several states did actually get relief of these petitioning requirements because the governors understood that COVID was an obstruction to the democratic process. For instance, in New Jersey, they requested relief and they were able to circulate these petitions online and take online signatures. A great way to do it. We failed during our case, so we had to do it in person. Now, the other way you can do it is through a write-in campaign. So states like Pennsylvania, they are going to switch to a write-in campaign for Howie Hawkins, and then that becomes informative of just how functionally to do that in Pennsylvania. There's 67 counties, and each county has a different type of voting machine that requires a different way for you to write somebody in. So that's a massive challenge on its own. But we did find success, like you mentioned, our statewide candidates for Auditor General, Attorney General, and State Treasurer were able to defend themselves and are on the ballot. So in Pennsylvania, it'll be a little bit unique where you don't have a top of the ticket, but you'll be able to vote for Green Party representation the whole way down the ballot. And in some cases, we do have candidates running for the state house. So you'll have a full option in those areas.
Perfect. So you did mention that when I brought up, the GOP being not challenging you guys, how they don't view you as a threat. That it kind of brings me to question whether or not the Democratic Party views you guys as a threat, which then brings me to my next question. So there has been some argument against voting for third party and our modern electoral politics. People are always saying, "Oh, just vote for the lesser two evils." Voting for third party is throwing your vote away. And I know this has been kind of beaten to death. And you're probably tired of answering this. I mean, yeah, I could tell. But how would you, as a member of the third party and as running as third party, argue against this narrow mindset, especially in the face of the current dilemma? Especially in the face of this current dilemma.
Yeah, I actually don't mind repeating it many times because folks need to hear it. So there's a failure in our present system. It
Mm-hmm.
really is, and it's turning people away from it. People don't want to go. People just don't want to vote anymore.
Yep.
When you look at it, the largest block of people in elections are the people that don't vote,
Mm-hmm.
and who could blame them? This is not an interesting or fun thing to be a part of. It really kind of blows to be work on something so hard and then just have it tramped on by these two conglomerate parties, and it turns people away just from being involved in the things that they actually want. Especially when you have the power parties ignoring everything that people are screaming about. Certainly during this time, it seems like it's a defunct and dysfunctional government,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just not going to get people engaged if you keep on doing that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the definition of insanity. So for me, why should you vote, or why should third party candidates continue this kind of to put themselves out there as what people pin us on as spoilers?
Yep.
That is almost it's almost the point, because you have to voice those minority opinions. You have to shed light on the fact that people are disenfranchised in the current system, and you have to work to build an alternative. If there aren't people that know how to do things like get on the ballot in 50 states, if there aren't people that know how to do things like how do I create a campaign finance report, then you
Yep.
don't have people getting involved, whether it be national or even at the bottom of the bucket, running for dog catcher level. There's still things that have to be done, and the Greens were part of that builds an education and knowledge base that's outside the two-party system, where it's almost like you're free to build your own. Come to our party. We'll give you time and resources and attention, and we want to see this direct democracy go forward. So, I think that voting for two-party for some people, it's more of just base building than it is participating in the thoughts and ideals of the two major parties.
Okay. To lead into the next question, I do have a question that what would you describe your personal politics as? I know I'm an anarchist, so a lot of my politics are around the direct democracy thing, making sure that we maintain sustainable systems, making sure that we engage the majority of people, or even to a point where we're breaking down these large, unjustified hierarchies. So, what would you say that your personal politics are?
Yeah, over the past couple of years, I'm embracing eco-socialism,
Mm-hmm.
where we're looking at things like collectives, co-ops, and municipal control over the details of things that provide benefits to the communities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when folks say socialism, the first thing they think about is the state, the big entity that basically controls your life, and that's something we need to reject too, because it's not going to take care of everything. Kind of like I was just saying, it's just going to do what it wants and ignore the folks at hand. So I think that there's a purpose for the state in my life when I'm looking at things like healthcare, a national defense. There are big items that is not going to be. We're a massive country. It can't be accomplished through small municipal control on some items. But there are plenty of other things that never should have went up to the federal government's control in our life. And there's other things that are just going to be much more sustainable. Energy and infrastructure, the resources that you can produce from your own community, and keeping community control over those items instead of giving them away to private for profit companies.
Mm-hmm.
There's aspects that I hold to close, where it's yes, like I said, the state control of some of this or state organized is good, but it needs to come from an agreement from the communities.
Awesome. I can definitely agree with most of that. Um, So then that kind of brings me to my next question, which is that a lot of times, especially now that now that you guys have Howie Hawkins at the top of the ballot, who is a self-professed socialist, and with you being a self-professed eco-socialist, the Green Party has kind of been painted as the unofficial party of socialism. So how would you really respond to that kind of presentation?
Well, I'm going to say yes and no. Officially, the Green Party adopted eco-socialism in their platform. I think that was 2 years ago, maybe three. You can't quote me on that, but it's there today. And Howie Hawkins is running on a unity platform. Basically, he's trying to get those that have a left affinity of the socialist flavor together to bring that cause to the forefront. It needs not to be a dirty word anymore. It needs to just be spoken, and then the policies actually looked at and understood how they can be applied to our daily lives. So the Green Party is turning that way, and it's our job to explain what that really means when you talk about eco-socialism, the rejection of a state power, but still the collective, force of the people.
Mm-hmm. And I know my conceptualization. One of the things that I've had to argue with, because as an anarchist, I kind of have to enlighten people what anarchism and socialism actually is. One of my kind of conceptualizations is socialism is not necessarily the state doing stuff. I mean, yeah, there are socialisms that involve, larger governmental bodies, but for the most part, socialism is about giving the power back to the people, not only just in government, but also in their workplaces, either through unionizing, co-ops, things like that. And I know you mentioned you guys were kind of behind the whole co-op movement, but like how specifically would you conceptualize this democratization of the workplace?
Yeah, the workplace is difficult. I work for a company that's, it's a Fortune 500. They're probably never going to see a union when it comes down to it. I think that's just the reality when you work for something that is that profit driven, profit hungry, and on a massive scale of that type. So we look down at the local level and how can you implement that. I stress the worker cooperative. It's basically unionizing on your own, and you all share in it. One part is you never think about our high school education. You never learned what the heck a cooperative was in high school, but you sure learned what a corporation is. So we have to educate folks on how this can be done, and show them examples of cooperatives, show them what mutual aid looks like in their community, and how that is actually practiced. And there's some good examples out there. One that I'll point to is Jackson, Mississippi, and the Jackson Cooperative. It's an entirely Black-owned community where they're basically taking themselves off the grid for self-empowerment, from owning the land all the way to providing the resources for their people. So there are examples out there, but it's just not going to be taught in the everyday textbook.
No, of course not. I know growing up, I barely ever learned about what socialism was, let alone how they've been implemented in history. I know a lot of anarchists will point to things like Rojava or to the Spanish Republicans, to Macanovia, to even some of these smaller communities in the U.S. that have popped up.
There's other good examples how that works too. Then people don't even realize it. Like Pennsylvania is a big farming area, especially here where I live, and we have the farmers cooperatives. And they've been around for years, and they're basically just a brotherhood that functions. And farming is a volatile industry.
Oh, definitely.
But, you're at the whims of at the weather. You're at the whims of demand. So they get the short stick one all the time. So they band together and they can help each other out over time through sharing equipment, resources, and financially. The backing of a group of individuals.
Yeah, and I know especially with the pandemic, farmers are being especially hit because with the closing down of a lot of restaurants and people not really being able to go out and buy as much food as they traditionally would, it kind of causes this great surplus on their farms. And Unfortunately, a lot of times, and unfortunately, due to our current economic system, they're forced to kind of destroy a lot of that food.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That happened here. We had dairy farmers dumping the milk just because the whole supply chain was built upon, for instance, supplying milk to public schools.
mm,
And when that was disrupted, there was nowhere to go with it.
mm. So, especially talking, kind of pivoting off the pandemic, we're one of the biggest things that we're seeing now is the an unprecedented housing crisis. I know more recently we kind of covered this a couple of weeks ago. The president had kind of signed this pseudo document saying that they're advising against eviction, and I know the CDC put some implementation out there to kind of slow the eviction process. And a lot of the majority parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, don't really address this eviction crisis beyond just shoving it downstream and hoping that it will solve itself. How would a Green Party treasurer, specifically you, manage that? Or more broadly, what is the Green Party platform regarding this unprecedented housing crisis coupled with an economic downturn?
Yeah, so a Green Party treasurer here in Pennsylvania would have a very difficult time to deal with something like that because we're limited with our resources, what we can really handle. You got a budget, and it's just like a household budget, like you and I have,
Mhm.
and you can only do so much reworking of that. If you had to react right away, the first thing I would have done was put a freeze on mortgages, put a freeze on rent. Um, you're seeing a lot of strife between landlords and their tenants because they're both screwed.
Yes.
When you got if the landlord's using that as their primary means of income, they're almost in the same boat as us.
Mhm.
We're starting to see that that's not a great practice. But what came out of a lot of these pandemic stimulus packages was that people got saved, but maybe the landlords didn't get saved.
Yeah.
And now it created strife down here between people. So, as a PA state treasurer, I'm really just an administrative person that's doing
Yeah.
the will of our House and or the General Assembly, executing the budget that they approved, that the governor crafted.
Mhm.
So you kind of got your hands tied, other than screaming at those deficiencies in it, because you see it all
Yeah.
come through. You see where the money goes. You see who's getting it. So
Mhm.
part of my job would be to put the spotlight on it about where it goes, and also I would be yelling about the lack of funding that we get from the federal government, because simply the federal government doesn't have a budget like you and I. They're not a household budget. They're the creator of the money here in the US through their fiat currency system.
Mhm.
So they can manage to basically supply us with money when we need it on demand for exact situations like this. So if they needed to freeze mortgage and just give the banks money like they do every day,
Yep.
they can go ahead and do it, so long as it's not going to have an adverse effect on the supply of housing out there.
Yes.
So it doesn't create a glut of housing, or it doesn't create a stress on the resources available for us to spend money on.
Mhm.
So, as a PA state treasurer in a pandemic, you're shuffling money around to provide the immediate needs of the people, but you also need to be hollering on the top of your lungs that this is an unsustainable thing for a state or commonwealth to do, and we need the federal government assistance or intervention in this.
Yeah. And viewers of my show will recognize, the kind of basic idea of modern monetary theory, with how the government can pretty much nowadays just print money and have everything solved, but they refuse to do that because of this recent lie that's been pushed by a lot of Republicans and even to some extent Democrats that, oh well, we need to balance the budget at the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is, they create the money. Their debt is in U.S. dollars, so they could literally print the problems away at this point, especially given the current hegemony of the U.S. economy. Um, so yeah, you're right. It is very frustrating to see the government the federal government sit down and say, "Oh no, we don't have the money to do that." But then in a recent stimulus package, pretty much give the MIC millions of billions of dollars just to do whatever with.
Right. They have the power to create it, and we see who they're giving it to. And the economic situation or in the health emergency of COVID-19, you know, it's interesting to see that they're still sitting back on their hands and giving the money to the wrong people.
Yes.
And that's a sad reality. But I hope that by continuing to talk about it and put light on it, people can understand that that is happening. That it's not an emergency, or we're not going to fall off a debt cliff in certain aspects, and we can utilize what they're already doing to benefit ordinary people.
Yes. Awesome. So we're kind of getting down to the end of the interview. Is there anything that you specifically would kind of want to bring up in terms of policies that are at the forefront of your mind, or even anything that you think my viewers should know about you or the Green Party as a whole, or even basic electoralist politics?
Yeah, I mean, well, let me spend a little bit of time. I'll talk about my campaign.
Sure.
PA State Treasurer, we kind of talked about why vote green, and my intent with the PA State Treasurer is to talk about a platform that other people won't discuss. I'm really looking on using this platform to talk about energy resources and the environment, and through PA State Treasurer, I'd basically be able to tell everybody, hey, we're giving tax breaks left and right to the fracking industry. We're giving tax breaks left and right to coal industry and even to steel. And why are we doing that to benefit them when they're just destroying the environment here in our community? We know, based on what happened in coal in Pennsylvania, that they're going to pick up and leave with all the benefits that they had provided by taxpayer funds. And we get the environmental damage after they're gone. We're still doing mine reclamation here in Pennsylvania on mines that were open 200-300 years ago. There's thousands, hundreds of thousands of old abandoned gas wells in Pennsylvania and oil wells that are just left open, spewing methane into the environment unchecked. No owners. They all gone bankrupt. So I see my position as being able to show that to people, and hopefully we can redirect folks' thoughts towards investing in some more sustainable businesses that way.
Okay.
If somebody is giving a tax credit for an oil well, why are we not giving tax credits for localized solar? We should have those programs, and I can speak to that as I see all the bills and pay all the breaks. The other.
So,
go ahead.
Kind of bouncing off of that, I kind of touched base with a lot of my viewers, and one of the biggest things that they wanted to bring up was, I know renewable resources is kind of a big thing, but one of the things that people tend to miscategorize is, and I know you probably have heard this before, but nuclear power. What would your position on nuclear power be as a sustainable resource, and how would you basically what would you feel is the best sustainable resource as someone from your field?
Sure. I mean, you're really going to have a hard time finding something that's truly sustainable, right? Like solar. What's the big criticism there? Where are you going to get the lithium batteries from? There's terrible practices all around on that. So you got to look at the real cost of a cost benefit analysis, where it comes from. Now, I am anti-nuclear, and I'll say that it really stems from the fact that there's no plan what to do with the waste. No plan. There's never been a plan with what to do with the waste. Right. I live next to 3 Mile Island here in Pennsylvania. They just are in the process of shutting down and decommissioning the plant. And the plan is to leave all the nuclear waste on that island for eternity, on an island in the middle of the Susquehanna River. I mean, that just doesn't seem like something that's going to be a great plan.
No.
And I know that there's a lot of talk about nuclear moving forward, that it's becoming more effective. And Unfortunately, a lot of that is concept. It's not proven
Yeah.
and tested, and you're going to spend a boatload of money trying to get it to the final concept. So if I'm going to spend that money, I want to put it in things that are just going to harvest wind, solar, other means, and I'm going to look at reducing consumption overall to balance that out. It will be a multi-tiered platform, but there's some poison pills, I would say, that I wouldn't want in my energy policy.
Yeah, and I definitely feel that because when I was going through my college education, one of the biggest things that they did was they separated us into two groups and was like, "Hey, here's nuclear power. Look at it. Figure out what the stances are, things like that." And one of the biggest costs is not only just where to put the spent nuclear energy, but also the massive infrastructure investment in building up the nuclear power plants in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking billions of dollars just to get it up, just to get it started, let alone up and running. And that's over the course of 10, 15 years in some cases. I'm not trying to sit here and convince you of nuclear power. I'm just kind of giving information to my viewers, kind of to give context to what you're saying, why you would prefer solar and wind over nuclear.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly in Pennsylvania, we pay for nuclear in our rates. It's locked into the electricity rate. So we are continually subsidizing through our use of electricity in Pennsylvania the private corporations that operate these nuclear facilities. And when you talk about, I mentioned 3 Mile Island because it's right here next to me. They decommissioned that, and the companies that operated it are trying to sell it so they get out of the liability in the long run, even though that they were taxpayer subsidized for well over a generation.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that you were continuing. Oh, you were continuing about other policies that you kind of wanted to bring up besides sustainable energy.
Yeah, I look at what can I do here in Pennsylvania as a treasurer. One thing that's hot is tax reform. We get a lot of our local taxes from our schools, and the property tax. The aspect there where we're trying to put light on is the corporate income tax and closing out what they call the Delaware loophole that allows corporations essentially just to only get taxed on a portion of their product instead of the whole product if they only have a part of an entity here in Pennsylvania. So there's a lot that we can focus on just balancing the way that we tax corporations versus the way that we tax individuals in the state. And then, the last plank that we're putting forward is criminal justice reform, doing things like ending cash bail. We just had an astonishing situation here in my local Lancaster County where you had 9 or 12 protesters to a recent killing of a person of color in the city. They were locked up, and some of those individuals had $1 million put on their head for bail money.
Jesus.
Cash bail, and it's a constitutional amendment violation to slam that on. For some people, none of them are getting $1 million to get out of jail.
Of course not.
But in others, $20,000 is obstructive. $5,000 is obstructive. So we want to look at doing things that can eliminate cash bail, among with a lot of different things for criminal justice reform. I'm sure you could use a whole, half hour, 2 hour, a whole day talking about that.
Yeah, definitely. Because I know my personal politics are, abolishing prisons, getting rid of cash bail, things like that. And I know in my own local city, there is a group of individuals that is constantly at the jail, constantly raising money for bail funds for these protests.
Yeah.
And we recently just had a lot of the jail support being arrested for merely being there. And it feels like, especially with what's going on in Portland and other states where federal agents are coming in and effectively kidnapping individuals and saying, hey, you're going to be threatened, you're going to be slapped with a felony if you continue to go to these protests, which is an amendment violation in and of itself. It feels like since the conception of the modern policing system, It's just a way to jail your political opponents.
Right. Yeah, and they're using things like bail and these abductions to silence political dissent. So it's a scary situation right now.
Yeah, it definitely is. Well, I think that's everything that I have. Is there anything that you'd like to plug besides, relative basic Green Party things and, vote for you kind of thing?
Well, yeah, I'll plug. I just want to give a shout out to the folks working down in Wetland Township, Middletown, down in Chester County, Pennsylvania, that are fighting back against against Sunoco and the Mariner 2 pipeline. Those folks have been challenged for well over 2-3 years on having a pipeline that's exporting product to Scotland.
Wow.
Having their property seized through eminent domain, and then just having their life disrupted by the process which is used to install that pipeline. So check it out. The Mariner 2, there's a lot of folks here in Pennsylvania that struggle with that. And that's just one of many that have gone through the state in the past couple of years.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on my show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been great. I appreciate you having me on and giving me an opportunity to speak.
Yeah, of course. Especially with one of the biggest things is especially with the modern mass media effectively silencing a lot of the dissenting political opinions. It's definitely worth my while to give platform to those who would be otherwise silenced.